Welcome to the Explainer. All right, today we're going to jump into our time machine and travel way back, about 2,600 years to ancient India. This was a time of absolutely massive change, one that gave birth to not just one, but two of the world's great philosophies. So let's just dive right in, because this is a fascinating question. Why then? Why there? Well, you can bet it was no coincidence. This was a full-blown revolution, really, and it was born out of a society that was being stretched to its absolute breaking point. To really get what's going on, we have to understand the world these new ideas were born into. We're talking about the very end of India's later Vedic period, a time when the old ways were just, well, they weren't working anymore, and the foundations of society were really starting to crack. So, picture this. On one hand, you've got the old world. It's an agricultural society, run by priests, the Brahmins, with a super rigid social ladder called the Varna system. But on the other hand, a new world is bubbling up, with booming cities, lots of trade, and a whole lot of people starting to question the old ways. And that clash, it created some serious social tension. And this is where it gets really interesting, because you have these four major pressure points all building at once. You've got the warriors, the kshatriyas, who are kind of thinking, hey, wait a minute, we're the ones protecting everyone. Then you've got the merchants, the vaishyas, who are making a ton of money but getting zero respect for it. And maybe most importantly, you have farmers who desperately need their animals to work the fields, but the priests are demanding those same animals for huge sacrifices. You see, pretty much everyone had a pretty good reason to look for a change. So right into the middle of all this turmoil and questioning, a prince is born. His name is Siddhartha Gautama, and his whole life was designed to shield him from the world's problems, until one day, it couldn't anymore. See, his father, the king, had heard a prophecy that his son would become a great holy man instead of a great ruler, and he was terrified of it. So he literally kept Siddhartha locked away in palaces, surrounded by nothing but youth, health, and luxury. But when he was 29, curiosity finally got the better of him. He snuck out of the palace, and what he saw changed everything. For the very first time in his life, he saw an old man, then a sick man, then a dead body, and it completely shattered his reality. He realized that suffering, sickness, and death, they come for everybody, even a prince. But then he saw a fourth sight, a calm, peaceful, holy man, an ascetic, who seemed totally untroubled by it all. And in that moment, Siddhartha knew he had to find that same freedom for himself. So after years of searching, trying everything from extreme fasting to intense meditation, he finally had his breakthrough under the famous Bodhi tree. He became the Buddha, which just means the enlightened one, and he was ready to share what he learned. His core teaching is so beautiful and simple, really. It's framed as the Four Noble Truths. He basically lays it out like a doctor. First, the diagnosis. Life inevitably involves suffering. Second, the cause of the illness, our constant craving, our desire for things to be different. Third, the good news, the prognosis. There is a cure. And fourth, the prescription for that cure, something called the Eightfold Path. In that prescription, the Eightfold Path isn't some strange mystical concept. It's actually a super practical guide for how to live your life. It's broken down into three main categories: developing wisdom, living an ethical and moral life, and training your mind through focus and meditation. It's a complete program, really. And this gets to the heart of it all. The Buddha taught that the way to freedom wasn't through extreme self-denial and torture, and it wasn't through indulging in every luxury either. No. The answer was right in between. He called it the middle path, a balanced, moderate life. But, Buddhism wasn't the only game in town. Around the same time, another incredibly powerful philosophy started to gain traction, Jainism, which was taught and spread by a great teacher named Mahavira. The name of the religion tells you so much. Jainism comes from the word Jina, which means conqueror. But we're not talking about conquering armies or kingdoms here. We're talking about a much, much harder battle, conquering your own inner world, your passions, your desires, all of it. Okay, so the core philosophy of Jainism is built on this fundamental split. On one side, you have the jiva, which is the pure living soul inside every being. And on the other, you have ajiva, which is all the non-living stuff, the material world, our desires, and these things called karmic particles that end up sticking to our soul. This is such a great way to picture it. Think of your soul as a perfectly clean white shirt. Every action you take, every desire you have generates karma, which is like fine dust that just clings to that shirt and makes it dirty. So the whole goal in Jainism is to stop collecting new dust and to carefully, meticulously brush off all the old dust until the soul is pure again. That's liberation, or moksha.
So you've got these two game-changing philosophies bubbling up from the exact same social pressure cooker. And get this, they were not alone, not by a long shot.
It's kind of hard to believe, but ancient texts tell us there were as many as 62 different philosophical schools of thought that popped up during this time. 62! It was a true marketplace of ideas, which just shows you how hungry people were for new answers.
And the legacy they all left? It's huge. Both Buddhism and Jainism push back hard against that rigid Varna system. They champion the idea of nonviolence, ahimsa, which really appealed to merchants and farmers who were tired of all the conflict and animal sacrifice. But maybe the biggest thing is they made spirituality accessible. They taught that anyone from any class could find inner peace. You didn't need a priest, you just needed self-discipline.
So you see, this whole age of awakening isn't just some dusty old history lesson. It leaves us with a timeless question that's just as real for us today as it was back then. Both of these paths agree that desire is the root of our suffering. So it makes you think, what if the key to happiness isn't about getting more, but about wanting less?